Hi, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 1 of Times Gone Tech. I think this season is going to be my best one so far. I've got a larger budget to work with this year, and that means, of course, more purchases, more product reviews, more experiments, more build videos. So I think this is going to be a really good season. I think you're going to enjoy it, so stick around. Speaking to that, of which, let me introduce my first new purchase for the year. And yeah, that looks like I just walked into the door with it from the postman, but no, I actually got this a couple of days ago. I wanted to make sure everything was okay, was working right and all before I started the video in case I had to ship it back. But I thought I'd put everything back in the box and show you what it looks like, you know, kind of a fake unboxing video. So let's get started here. I'm gonna open this up. And as you can see, it is an Uberti, and let me open that up. Imported by Midway USA. And this is my very first, and so far only, 1847 Colt Walker reproduction made by Uberti. Now, you might notice a couple of things about this that might seem a little odd to you, unusual, like this little thing here in the front. The cylinder's not been blued, it's in the white. See that? Yeah, let me talk about that. The 1847 Walker had a couple of major design flaws, one of which was, especially if it was loaded with full power, is this loading lever had a tendency to drop open, work its way into the cylinder, and locking it up, and you couldn't fire another round until you closed it. So basically you would shoot, close the lever, shoot, close the lever, shoot, close the lever. Yeah, and I've seen YouTube videos where people show you how to correct that by working down this little nubbin here and sanding it. Well, the Rangers that this was intended for and who purchased it actually came up with a very simple low-tech fix of their own. They just took a small piece of rawhide, I'm using a shoestring, made a loop, slipped it over the barrel, there, problem solved. Now if you're wondering, yeah, but won't that interfere with the sights? Yeah, a little, but you know, when you're shooting over your shoulder on horseback at full gallop across the Texas plains, you ain't gonna aim anyway, so it doesn't matter. The second thing is the cylinder not being blued. Now, of course, Uberti shipped it in blued. I took the bluing off by soaking it in a vinegar bath for about 30 minutes. And the reason is because Sam Colt originally issued the Walker with the cylinder in the white, unblued. I'm not sure what his motivations for that were, but personally, having learned a little bit about the man from doing some research on him, I think maybe he was just shaving a few dollars off the manufacturing costs of the order to put in his own pocket. And, you know, a few pennies here, a few pennies there. So just don't blue the cylinder. You know, you save that money. Over 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 rounds, or guns, it could add up. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking. So I wanted mine to look a little more historically accurate, so I put the loop on. Again, this is a shoestring. I'm going to be changing this out for rawhide later because that's what they used. And I took the bluing off the cylinder. So if you were walking around in the 1800s and you saw somebody in Texas carrying a gun like this, you wouldn't think twice about it. That's just how it was. That's how they did it. So of course, I'm going to take this outside and shoot it. In fact, I got it loaded up now. I just haven't put any caps on it, so it's safe. But yeah, I'm going to take this thing outside and shoot it here in just a bit. But before I do that, first, let me do a quick review about this particular Uberti gun. Now, like I said, I've already shot a couple cylinders through it just to make sure everything worked. And I've got to say I'm quite impressed with the quality of manufacture. This thing shoots right out of the box. When I work the action, which it's loaded, so I'm not going to do here, even though it's got no caps on it. But when I work the action, it's smooth, it's clean. There's just no problem with it. It's just a good firearm all the way around. So before I get this outside and shoot it, again, this time on camera, let me tell you a little bit of the history behind the Walker and why this thing, even today, is seen as having served such an important role in American history, even though it was very limited. Well, Colt got a patent for what he called the revolving gun in 1836. And he didn't invent the idea of a revolver. There were other people working on this, but their designs were just incredibly complex. They were fragile, they were expensive to make, they broke easy. They just didn't work very well. So Colt came up with the first genuinely practical design for a revolver. And his first experiment commercially with it was the Patterson, named after where it was made, Patterson, New Jersey. It was originally issued in .28 caliber, came with no loading lever. Within a year, he beefed it up to .36 caliber and added a loading lever. Well, he sold some to the U.S. Army, who used it with some success against a Seminole uprising in Florida. And he sold 180 to the state of Texas, Republic of Texas, at that time, I think, who then issued it to the Texas Rangers. Now, the Rangers, they were an interesting group of people. First, they were the Texas military. They were really the only military Texas had. They were volunteers. They were generally supplied their own weapons. They were usually not paid very often. They were always seriously outnumbered. I mean, we're talking 12, 20 to 1. Texas had declared its independence from Mexico, but Mexico didn't really accept it at that time. So the war with Mexico was still going on down on the Rio Grande. The emperor's plan was to take control of the Rio Grande and then slowly start moving back north again and take the state. So the Rangers were tasked with keeping the Mexican army back south of the Rio Grande. Plus, the Native Americans who were already in Texas, called the Comanches, I think they rightfully thought the state belonged to them and declared it for themselves and declared war against everybody else who wasn't Comanche. So the Rangers had to deal with that. Then there were wandering bands of just psychopath, just scum of the earth, the only way to describe them, called Comancheros, who would just attack anyone they saw, kill them, rob them, and then trade what they got off with the Comanches. So they were called Comancheros. The Rangers had to deal with that. And then finally, there were the Jeffrey Dahmers, the Ed Geins. I mean, Texas seemed to be a magnet for every antisocial psychopath in the country. Just wandering around, killing and raping and murdering and having fun. Rangers had to deal with that too. In 1845, Texas was annexed into the United States, and the Texas War of Independence became the Mexican-American War. Now, Texas hoped that would bring the U.S. military in to help them out, but it didn't really. The Patterson saw some action down on the border, and the Rangers using them, they liked the Patterson's multi-shot capability because they were always outnumbered. But there were some real problems with the Patterson design. Underpowered, 28 caliber, 36 caliber. Complicated, it was prone to breaking, it was expensive to make, it was not ergonomically designed, it wasn't comfortable in the hand. It just wasn't a good gun all the way around. But because of that 5-shot capability, the Rangers liked it. The U.S. military, U.S. Army wasn't as impressed with it as the Rangers were, but they weren't in the same kind of situation either. A captain in the Texas Rangers named Samuel Walker was tasked with cleaning the state up. The problem was he did not have the manpower to do it, and he knew that. He just was never going to get it. He knew that too. But he didn't have a clue what to do about it until one day he saw Patterson in action down on the Rio Grande during the war with Mexico. And this gave him a brilliant idea. If he couldn't get 12 men with 1 shot each, because remember, the Patterson was the only revolver out there. Everything else were single shot flintlock and caplock muzzle loaders. So if he couldn't get 12 men with 1 shot each, maybe he could give the one man he could get 12 shots. So Sam Walker went to see Sam Colt, placed an order for 1,000 revolvers made to the Ranger's specifications. Okay, Colt had already gone out of business. He'd gone into bankruptcy because of the low sales of the Patterson. He'd closed his firearms company down, and he was making electrical detonators for underwater explosives. So when he got the visit from Sam Walker, he jumped on that offer like a duck on a June bug. The requirements were it had to be a high caliber, 44, 45, none of that wimpy 28, 36 crap. It had to be 6 shots, not 5. It had to have the same fire power as a musket or a carbine, and that would be like 60 grains of triple F black powder, which was just unheard of in a handgun at that time. This is heavy, long gun charge. And it had to have a loading lever, unlike the original Patterson. Okay, Colt took the offer up. In 1847, he had issued Walker's 1,000 handguns. Now, the problem Colt was facing was that he couldn't get the high quality steel that he needed for castings to handle the chamber pressures for the cylinders and the barrels. He had to go with wrought iron. And so in order to get the strength that he needed, he had to really beef it up. I mean, this thing is huge. In fact, why don't we compare the 1847 Walker to the later 1860 model Army? Same caliber, 44 caliber. You see the difference? Do you see a difference there in the size of that thing? I'm going to go through the specifications on these in a minute, but yeah, that was the only way Colt could resolve the problem. Now, he had some other problems. Again, there were some design flaws. The loading lever dropping was one of them. But another thing was, even though Colt designed the cylinder to hold 60 grains of powder, just like a musket or a carbine, if you shot that much through it, they had a tendency to explode. And in fact, over the first year or two, 300 of Sam Walker's 1,000 revolvers were sent back to Colt for repair. Part of them because of that. Partly because the Rangers, who had never seen a conical bullet before, you know, there's a reason these are called cap and ball, not cap and conical. It's because everybody at that time were shooting ball ammo. And some of these guys had never seen a conical bullet before in their life, and they were loading them in backwards. And that increased chamber pressure was just blowing the cylinders apart. There are a few other minor issues that over the next few years, Colt worked out and tried to improve with his Dragoon series. But at the time, Sam Walker picked up his 1,000 Walker revolvers in 1847. Sam Colt ordered another 100 because he didn't make these himself. He'd shut his company down. He'd gone into bankruptcy. So he contracted the manufacturer out to Eli Whitney. So when he ordered the 1,000 guns for Sam Walker, he ordered another 100 for himself. And he planned on using these to present to the U.S. Army for a potential contract to try and break into the private sector for gifts, promotional items, you know, things like that. Now, the thing is this, that 1,100 that were originally made, that's all of the Colt Walker that was ever made. Sam Colt never got a single order for a single gun after the original 1,100 were made. Now, the question is why? Again, before I get into that, how did the Texas Rangers receive it? What was their opinion of it? Well, they just fell in love with this thing overnight. This was the great equalizer. Sam Walker's vision was every Ranger would be equipped with a pair of these in holsters mounted to the front of the saddle. So they weren't wearing these on their hips, okay? They were carrying these things around on a horse. These things are just too heavy, really. Although a few Rangers actually did carry a pair of these on their waist. Most of them did not. But what this did was it gave one Ranger 12 shots against, you know, gang of 6 banditos 6 shots. So twice the firepower of a well-armed, nice-sized gang of Comancheros or banditos. They absolutely loved the firepower, the range, the knockdown ability of this thing. It was just it's hard to explain really how much the Rangers loved this gun. But if you want to get an idea, to this day, in fact, in 2021, the governor of Texas officially declared the Colt Walker as the official handgun for the state of Texas. How about that? And if you can even find one of these originals for sale today, depending on its condition, you might want to be prepared to spend upwards of $2 million for it. Yes, I said $2 million. Now, some sell for around $900,000, but again, it depends on the condition of the gun. So if the Rangers loved this so much, it saw tremendous success down on the border. In fact, down on the border with the Mexican-American War, there are stories like how 2 Rangers armed only with Walkers held off an entire company of battle-hardened Mexican infantry until the infantry were so demoralized they just gave up and retreated. 2 Rangers against an entire company of battle-hardened foot soldiers. With this, especially with a pair of these, 1 Ranger could ride into a camp of 12 banditos and conceivably kill every single one of them. And a few of Rangers actually did things like that. It was the Walker that actually led to the Rangers' now famous motto, 1 riot, 1 Ranger. So what happened? You'd think the sales would go through the roof. You'd think people would be ordering these things from all around the world, and not a single order. Well, the thing is this, the military, the U.S. military, the Army, the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., who were in charge of giving out the contracts for their weapons, they really just didn't understand it. I guess it's hard to explain just how radical the technology of the Walker was at that time. There was nothing like the Walker in the textbooks on military tactics at West Point. They just didn't know what to do with it. They didn't really need a handgun that could knock a man off his horse at 100 yards. Most battles involving handguns would have taken place within 50 yards or even less. And handguns really were not considered important weapons in the tactics of the battlefield of the early 19th century. Now, all of that changed with the Civil War, but this was before the Civil War. And all bureaucrats of every generation, they tend to have no imagination whatsoever. They didn't see anybody else using anything like this. The Texas Rangers, but they didn't see any other armies, real armies anywhere in Europe were using it. They didn't have a clue what to do with it, so they just chose to do nothing. They used the design flaws as an excuse, I think, but I think that was just an excuse. I think the reality was they didn't like it. And it's not unusual. In every generation, there are bureaucrats who have, like I said, they have no vision, no imagination whatsoever. In the early 1900s, one admiral in the British Navy once said about submarines, he said they were underwater, underpowered, underhanded, and damned un-British. And he recommended that future development of submarines be killed. Of course, then World War I started, and the German submarine fleet began sinking every Allied ship they encountered, and things pretty well changed. But gives you the idea of how bureaucrats think a lot of times. So that didn't go anywhere for Sam Colt. Civilians didn't really like it for much the same reasons. I mean, I don't need a gun this big to defend myself at maybe arm's length walking down the street in town, I don't need to knock an enemy soldier off his horse at 100 yards. I mean, this thing is a bear killer. The problem with that is I'm not likely to encounter very many bears walking down the street of Abilene, Texas, or St. Louis, or New York, or anywhere else. So why do I need something like this? In many jurisdictions at that time, the open carry firearms was prohibited. Yes, it was. The idea about every man walking down the street with a gun on his hip is just a pure myth. That's total bullshit. In most townships and cities, you absolutely could not do that. It's too big and heavy to comfortably wear on my hip anyway. I mean, for a few minutes or a few hours, but all day, every day, I mean, this thing will give you adult scoliosis. It's too difficult to try and carry concealed. A few people did. They tried cutting the barrel off, cutting it down like this to make a belly gun out of it, but that just kills the power. It's not really worth it anymore. So civilians didn't really like it either. Basically, it was just too much gun. Now, let's look at why. The Colt Model 1860 Army, 44 caliber. The Colt Walker, 1847, 44 caliber. 6-round capacity, 6-round capacity. Charge, officially 30 grains of triple F. Now, I have loaded this with 40, but it's tough. I mean, you got to really compact that ball down to get it below the surface of the cylinder, but it will hold 40 grains, but officially it's rated for 30 grains. This will hold 60 grains, twice as much, but Colt recommended no more than 50. But that's the originals that were made out of iron. This one, by Uberti, is made out of steel. Even mild steel is tremendously stronger than wrought iron. This thing will handle 60 grains. So 30 grains, 60 grains. Muzzle velocity, average 900 feet per second, average around 1,200 feet per second. Now, the maximum rated for this gun, this 1860 Army, is 1,000 feet per second, whereas the maximum rated for this gun is 1,350 feet per second. So, just below the speed of sound, decently over the speed of sound, which means severe hydrostatic shock. Oh, one more thing. Rated effective range, maximum effective. Now what that means is maximum accurate effective. That means it'll hit where it's aimed for the most part. Colts tend to shoot high and to the right, but if you compensate for that, it'll hit where it's aimed with enough power to kill somebody at 75 yards. But Colt kind of hedged their bets on that, and they rated it at 50 to 75 yards. Depends on the situation and how it's loaded. Maximum effective accurate range, 100 yards. Up to twice the range of the later Model 1860 Army. Now, between 1860 and 1873, Colt sold 200,000 of these things. 1,100. So, again, my opinion on that is the Walker was, in a way, a victim of its own success. It was a world-class, monster, heavy assault weapon, long-range killing capacity, right? But designed for a very specific use, out on the open plains of Texas. You take it out of that environment, and there really wasn't any place for it. It was a heavy assault weapon in a world at a time when nobody outside of the environment it was designed for really needed or wanted it. And so it just faded into history. Other guns came along that were smaller, lighter, every bit just as effective in real-world situations, because eventually Texas did get its act cleaned up pretty much. If you remember the old miniseries Lonesome Dove, at the start when the Gus McCrae character is talking to Call and says, something like it ever occurred to you that we killed all the men that made this state an interesting place? Yeah, that's a Texas Ranger from that period. Okay, enough yakety yak. Let's go outside and shoot this baby. Okay, I'm out here at the test range, and I've loaded this up with 60 grains of Triple F 777 and a .453 soft lead ball. Now, Triple F 777 would put the power up close to what black powder would have been like back in the 19th century. It was a little hotter then than it is now. So let's see what we get. Okay, what's it like to shoot it? A little disappointing in some ways. After everything I've heard about the Walker, I expected it to try and jump out of my hand every time I pulled the trigger. But the thing is so massive, it's so heavy, that the felt recoil is actually pretty light. It's no more than a typical 357 Magnum, which this is just about equal to. Okay, no misfires, no cap jams. We got some caps stuck on the nipple, but they're coming off. Got one there that, there it went off. Okay. Wow. That's a whole lot of gun there. Man. Okay, the Colt 1847 Walker. Okay, it occurred to me that you might want to see where I hit it. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe, no, that's too small. 5's buckshot. 5 in here, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pretty sure that's not one of them. Yeah, but that looks like that's where 2 bullets hit. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Kills, here, 5 of them. 6 kill, depending on where it might hit. You know, this could be chest, throat, neck, lung hit. So, yeah, not bad at 12 yards. Not too bad. Talking too fast. Get my ears back on here. I'm talking too fast. It makes it hard to edit. Run words together. I need to slow down and give myself break points for editing. I just love my subject. I get excited. What can I say?